Hi, welcome back. We're continuing to talk about properties of real numbers. In our last video, we talked about the sets that real numbers may belong to. And in this video, we are going to continue on with real number properties. So these are going to be properties that are true for all real numbers. We're going to step through these one at a time in this video and talk about them, and in the next video we'll look at some examples. So our first property is the commutative property. It's written as A plus B is equal to B plus A. For addition and for multiplication, A times B is equal to B times A. So this is the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. Basically, what this property means is that we can change the order of our addition and our multiplication. To commute is to drive, the morning commute is when people get in their cars and they drive to work. So they are physically moving, which means our numbers are going to physically move places. So A plus B, A and B are going to move and switch places and become B plus A. Same thing is true in multiplication. To commute is to travel. So we are traveling with the commutative property. The associative property is if we have the quantity A plus B plus C, we could rewrite this as A plus the quantity B plus C. Or for multiplication, the quantity A times B times C could be rewritten as A times the quantity B times C. To associate, if you have friends who are your associates, business associates, they're people that you are connected to or you are grouped with. So the associative property deals with grouping. It's a changing of grouping. You'll notice that the order does not change for the variables. They do not move or change position. The only thing that changes in the associative property is the grouping. On the left-hand side, A plus B is grouped, and on the right side, B plus C is grouped. The identity property of addition says that any number plus 0 is equal to itself, and the identity property of multiplication says any number multiplied by 1 is equal to itself. We can also write this as 0 plus the number or as 1 times the number. So the identity property is that any number is equal to itself times 1 or itself plus 0. The inverse property of addition says that A plus the opposite of itself is equal to 0, or the opposite of a number plus itself is equal to 0, or A times 1 over A is equal to 1 for multiplication, or 1 over A times A is also equal to 1. For this particular property, A may not be equal to 0. So the addition property and the multiplication property of inverse, when we're looking at these, it's what do we have to either add or multiply by to make the variable go away. So for addition, we want to end up with 0, and multiplication, we want to end up with 1. The closure property says that if A and B are real numbers, A plus B is a real number, and the closure property says that if A and B are real numbers, A times B is a real number. For all of these properties, we are assuming A, B, and C are real numbers. So I'll write that up here. I didn't make a nice place to write that. But A, B, and C are real numbers for all of these properties. Our last property we're going to look at is the distributive property. The distributive property is really for addition and multiplication. It's the same. It's not the distributive property of addition or the distributive property of multiplication. It's just the distributive property. And the distributive property says that A times B plus C is the same thing as AB plus AC, or B plus C times A is the same thing as BA plus CA, or we distribute this value in. If we have a value being multiplied by a grouping, it gets distributed into every term within. The other direction of this is if I have AB plus AC, I can use the distributive property to pull out a common factor of A, and I could write that as B plus C. Or if I had BA plus CA, I could similarly pull out the common factor of A, and this would become B plus C times A. So these are all of our real number properties. Remember, commuting is to move, so our values are actually going to move their position. Associative has to do with grouping, so our grouping is actually going to change, but the order of the values doesn't. So nothing moves, but our grouping does change. Identity property, what do we have to add or multiply by to get the original value? Inverse, what do I have to add or multiply to get rid of the original value? In addition, getting rid of the value gives us 0. In multiplication, it gives us 1. Closure, if I add two real numbers together, I still have a real number. If I multiply two real numbers by each other, I still have a real number. And the distributive property says that I can distribute something into grouping, or I can pull something out to make a grouping. In our next video, we'll look at some examples of how to apply this.